Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxing History Time. Tonight we begin not in a library or a museum, but out in the open cold where the ground is stiff beneath your boots and your breath fogs the air in front of your face. You are standing in a winter so harsh it feels alive, biting at your fingers, creeping into your bones, daring you to make a mistake. Somewhere nearby the wind howls across a treeless plain, and you already know the uncomfortable truth. You probably would not survive this without help. Not for long, anyway. This is where people like you once stood thousands of years ago, scanning the frozen horizon and making a choice that seems strange to us now. Instead of building higher, instead of fighting the cold head-on, you turn your attention downward, toward the soil, toward the dark, toward the quiet promise of warmth beneath your feet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, feel free to post your location and your local time down in the comments. It is always comforting to know how far this quiet voice travels. Now dim the lights and let the story carry you gently underground. You lower yourself closer to the earth, brushing snow aside with numb hands. The surface is cruel, but just below it the soil feels different. Still cold, yes, but steady, predictable, ancient. You do not know the science words for insulation or thermal mass yet, but your body understands them instinctively. Dirt does not scream like the wind. Stone does not shift like snowdrifts. Underground the temperature stays closer to what it was yesterday and the day before that. That simple fact becomes one of the most important discoveries in human history. Archaeologists agree on one solid point here. By at least the last ice age, humans across Europe, Asia, and North America were digging pit houses and earth-sheltered dwellings to survive winter extremes. That is your mainstream historical anchor for tonight. It is not dramatic. It does not sparkle, but it saved lives. You scrape away frozen soil using a stone tool that fits your hand like it was meant to be there. Because it was. Someone shaped it for this exact task. Digging is slow work. Your muscles burn, your breath comes heavy, and the smell of raw earth rises around you. Damp, mineral-rich, faintly sweet. It smells like safety. You carve just deep enough that the wind no longer reaches you. Already the silence feels thicker. There is a strange comfort in being held by the ground. The walls do not sway, the ceiling does not flutter. You realize something subtle but profound. The earth does not care about the storm above. It has its own patience, its own time. Here comes a curious detail that rarely makes it into textbooks. In parts of prehistoric Siberia, some underground shelters appear to have been lined with mammoth bones, not as decoration, but as structural support and insulation. Imagine that for a moment. The curved ribs of an animal towering above you in life now forming a quiet protective cage around your winter home. Practical, yes. Slightly unsettling, also yes. As you settle deeper into this space, the cold loosens its grip. Your fingers regain feeling, your shoulders drop. This is not luxury, but it is relief, and relief is everything. Historians still argue whether these early underground homes were meant as permanent residences or seasonal refuges used only during the worst months. The evidence points both ways. Some sites show repeated use over generations. Others look like temporary answers to desperate winters. You do not need to solve that debate tonight. You just need to feel why the idea worked. Above you the wind roars. Down here it becomes a distant suggestion like someone else's problem. Sound travels differently underground. It dulls, softens, turns sharp, danger into a low background hum. Even your thoughts seem quieter, slower. You notice how your breath fogs less now, how the air feels heavier but calmer. This is the trade. Fresh air for warmth, space for safety, sunlight for survival. It is not a choice made lightly, but it is made again and again across continents and cultures. There is a gentle sarcasm to the situation if you let yourself notice it. Modern humans spend fortunes trying to escape basements while ancient humans would have gladly paid anything to have one. Down here you are not glamorous. You're alive. You press your palm against the wall. It is cold but not cruel. The earth absorbs your heat slowly, politely. It gives some back, not much, just enough. This first descent underground is not yet a home. It is a realization, a quiet agreement between human and planet. You will stop trying to dominate winter and instead you will hide from it, adapt to it, borrow a little peace from beneath the surface. As you curl into the space listening to the muted world above, something shifts in you. Fear eases. The night feels longer but less threatening. You're not exposed anymore, you're sheltered, held, and as your eyes adjust to the dimness, you begin to understand that this choice, this simple act of digging down instead of building up, will echo through thousands of years of human survival. You are standing at the beginning of that story with dirt under your nails and warmth slowly returning to your bones. The ground has accepted you, and for tonight that is enough. You stay low to the ground as the night stretches on, and somewhere between shallow sleep and quiet thought you begin to realize that this is not just about hiding, it is about learning. The first winters teach harsh lessons, and you are a quick student when the penalty for failure is frostbite or worse. Above ground, everything changes too fast. Snow piles up, wind scours, skin raw, and shelters made of branches collapse under their own weight. Below ground, the world slows down. When dawn arrives, you barely notice. The light does not burst in here. It seeps faint and indirect, filtering through a narrow opening. You covered with hides and packed snow. The temperature feels almost the same as it did hours ago. That sameness is the miracle. You did not invent warmth, but you learned how to keep it from escaping. This is where early humans cross an invisible line from reacting to winter to planning for it. Archaeological evidence from sites like Mezhyrich in present-day Ukraine shows circular pit dwellings dug into the earth as early as 15,000 years ago. That is your solid historical anchor here. These were not accidents. They were designed, measured, repeated. You step outside briefly, just long enough to gather fuel. The cold slaps you awake sharp and immediate, and it reinforces the lesson. Above ground, winter is loud. It howls, cracks, and groans. Below ground, it whispers if it speaks at all. When you return inside, you feel the contrast in your chest, the way your breathing slows as soon as you duck back down. Digging becomes an act of foresight. You are not just making a hole, you are shaping tomorrow. Each scoop of soil is a small investment against hunger and cold. The floor slopes, gently guiding meltwater away. The walls curve inward, resisting collapse. You do not have blueprints, but your hands remember what worked last year. Muscle memory becomes architecture. Here is a detail that feels almost playful in its cleverness. In some early pit houses, people intentionally left a raised sleeping platform carved into the soil, knowing that cold air settles lower. You sleep a little higher, warmer by design. No mattress, no blankets beyond animal skins. Yet the physics works quietly in your favor. It is the kind of solution you arrive at only after many uncomfortable nights. Scholars still debate how quickly these design choices spread between groups. Some argue ideas travelled with migrating bands shared at seasonal gatherings. Others believe similar solutions simply emerged independently, because cold demands the same answers from anyone who faces it long enough. Either way, you feel part of a wider pattern, even if you never meet the others living like this beyond the horizon. As winter deepens, the shelter stops feeling temporary. Tools collect in familiar corners. Food stores stack neatly against the wall, frozen solid but protected from scavengers. Smoke stains darken the ceiling. Where a small fire burns carefully, its heat lingering long after the flames die down. You learn to keep it low and slow. Too much fire makes smoke. Too little makes misery. The smell inside becomes something you associate with survival. Earth, ash, dried meat. It is not pleasant by modern standards, but it is reassuring. Each scent means something is working. Outside smells like danger. There is a strange psychological shift that happens after weeks underground. Time feels thicker. days blur gently into each other. Without the sun to mark every hour, you move by rhythm instead. Eating, sleeping, repairing, waiting. Modern people would call it claustrophobic. You call it predictable. Here comes another unusual tidbit that archaeologists still puzzle over. In a few ancient pit dwellings, researchers have found small decorative carvings pressed into the walls, spirals and handprints traced into wet clay. These were not necessary. They did not make the shelter stronger or warmer. Yet someone took the time to leave a mark. Even underground you want beauty, or maybe reassurance that you were here. The ground teaches patience. You cannot rush it. Dig too fast and walls collapse, burn too hot and oxygen thins. Every action has consequences that linger longer underground. That awareness sharpens your judgment. You become quieter, more deliberate. Winter shapes behavior as much as shelter. You think briefly about the surface world, about how fragile life feels up there right now. Animals struggle, plants vanish beneath snow, only the wind seems truly alive. Down here, life feels paused but protected like a breath held carefully. Historians continue to argue whether early humans fully understood why underground living worked so well, or whether they simply followed trial and error until something stuck. The truth probably lives somewhere in between. You do not need equations to feel warmth staying with you longer. You just need memory. As another storm passes overhead unnoticed, you settle deeper into routine. This shelter is no longer an experiment. It is a response refined by suffering and success. The first winters were brutal teachers, but you listened. You adapted. You stopped fighting the cold and started outlasting it. You lie back against the packed earth, listening to the soft crackle of embers and the faint distant sound of wind you barely register anymore. Above you winter still rages, below you endure, and in that endurance something important has taken root as quietly and stubbornly as the shelter itself. You begin to notice something subtle as the days pass, something your body understands before your mind gives it words. The earth around you is not just blocking the cold, it is holding on to yesterday. The warmth from last night's fire still lingers in the walls. The chill from outside arrives late, tired, softened. This is where the ground reveals its quiet talent. It remembers temperature. Packed soil and stone act like a slow-breathing creature. They absorb heat when there is extra and release it gradually when the air cools. You do not know the term thermal mass, but you live inside its effects. This is one of those moments where modern science eventually catches up to ancient experience. Archaeologists agree that underground dwellings maintain far more stable internal temperatures than surface huts, even without constant fires. That simple physical truth becomes a cornerstone of survival. You run your fingers along the wall. It feels cool, but not hostile. The surface is smooth where hands have pressed and shaped it rougher where stone juts through. Every texture tells a story of effort. Digging was not easy, but the reward is this steady calm, this refusal of the earth to panic when winter howls. Here is a strange little detail that still surprises researchers. In some ancient pit houses, layers of different soils were intentionally used heavier clay near the base and lighter dirt above. This was not accidental collapse. It suggests that people noticed certain earth types held heat and structure better. You might not explain it, but your ancestors experimented, felt, adjusted, and remembered. Above ground, temperature swings wildly. One clear night can freeze skin solid. One brief thaw can turn paths into traps of slush and ice. Underground, the swings are gentler. You wake up to roughly the same air you fell asleep in. Your muscles ache less. Your joints stay looser. Survival is not just about avoiding death. It is about preserving strength. You tend the fire carefully. Too much flame and the air grows thick. Too little and the stored warmth drains away. The earth becomes your partner here. It does not demand constant feeding like a surface shelter. It asks for patience instead. Slow fires, long pauses, trust that yesterday's heat will still be here this morning. Historians still debate whether early humans fully recognized insulation as a concept or whether they simply noticed that underground shelters required less fuel. Some argue fuel efficiency drove the shift underground, especially in treeless winter landscapes. Others think comfort and safety mattered more. You suspect all of it blended together. Hunger, cold exhaustion, they all push decisions in the same direction. As you sit quietly, you hear the muffled world above. Snow slides off something. Wind moans across an opening. These sounds arrive softened like they pass through layers of thought before reaching you. Even danger seems tired down here. Your breath creates small clouds that fade slowly. The air feels heavier. Yes, but it holds warmth better than the thin, biting cold outside. You adjust the entrance covering, packing more snow against it. Snow ironically becomes insulation too. Trapped air between flakes creates another buffer. Winter fighting winter, and you benefit. There is a quirky detail that always feels slightly ironic. Some underground homes were warmer in winter than they were in summer. When heat rose outside, the earth stayed cool. When cold arrived, the earth stayed warmer. It is almost smug in its consistency. You can imagine ancient people noticing this and quietly laughing at the seasons above just a little. Living inside this steady temperature changes your sense of time. Without dramatic shifts, days blur softly. You notice smaller things instead, the sound of your own movement, the crackle of embers, the faint drip of melting frost somewhere far above. Comfort sharpens attention rather than dulling it. You stretch out on a raised sleeping area, remembering why it exists. Cold air sinks, warm air rises, even underground physics still applies. Sleeping higher keeps you warmer. It is such a simple idea, yet it feels like a gift every night. Scholars continue to argue about how much planning went into these early shelters. Were they carefully calculated or gradually perfected through generations? The truth likely lives in calloused hands and shared stories. Someone noticed something worked. Someone else copied it. Over time, the earth itself became part of cultural memory. As you drift toward rest, you realize that insulation is not just physical. This space insulates your mind. The chaos of winter feels far away. Your thoughts slow. Worry softens. Down here, the world is reduced to manageable size. The ground holds you steady. It remembers warmth. It forgets storms. And as you close your eyes wrapped in skins and quiet, you understand that choosing to live underground was not just clever, it was calming. And in a brutal winter, calm can be the difference between enduring and breaking. You begin to notice that you are not the first to think this way. As you settle deeper into the underground rhythm of winter life, your attention drifts to the quiet neighbors who share this hidden world. Long before human-shaped tools, animals mastered the art of disappearing beneath the surface. You watch them closely now because survival has made you observant. A fox vanishes into a narrow den as the wind sharpens. Rodents slip into tunnels that crisscross beneath the snow like secret roads. Even insects retreat downward, finding stable temperatures where the frost cannot reach. This is not coincidence. Nature figured this out long before you arrived. Humans, as usual, are catching up. Evidence from prehistoric sites suggests that early humans often chose settlement areas already riddled with animal burrows or softwork soil. This is one of those quietly accepted findings in archaeology. Digging is easier where the ground has already been disturbed. You're not just learning from animals, you're borrowing their infrastructure. You crouch near the entrance of your shelter and listen. Beneath the wind there is faint movement, scratching, shifting, life continuing out of sight. It is strangely comforting. You are not alone down here. The underground world is busy even in winter. There is a small but fascinating detail uncovered at several ancient sites. Some early human shelters appear to have deliberately incorporated existing animal tunnels as ventilation channels. Not repurposed neatly, not labelled, just widened slightly and left functional. Imagine that. A shared design language between species, accidental cooperation driven by cold. Experts remain divided on how intentional this imitation really was. Some believe humans consciously observed animals and copied their strategies. Others argue the overlap happened naturally, because both species sought the same environmental advantages. You suspect the truth is messier and more human. You see something that works, you try it. If you live, you keep doing it. As winter deepens, animals become teachers. You learn when they retreat how deep they go, where snow piles least. You notice that dens often face away from prevailing winds, that entrances are narrow, conserving heat and blocking drafts. You adjust your own shelter accordingly, tightening the opening, angling it just so. Trial and error guided by fur and instinct. The underground world smells different when animals are near. Earthier, musky, not always pleasant, but informative. Scent carries meaning. If something larger passes through, you know. If rodents are nearby, you prepare. Living underground means sharing space willingly or not. Here is a curious observation that surprises many modern readers. Some early communities appear to have tolerated small animals inside their shelters during extreme cold, not as pets exactly, but as living heaters. A cluster of bodies produces warmth. Fleas aside, the arrangement made sense. You can almost hear someone shrugging and deciding it was worth it. You learn the risks too. Burrows collapse. Animals panic. A startled creature in a confined space is chaos with teeth. Underground living demands patience and awareness. You move slowly. You listen more than you act. Researchers studying Ice Age settlements often point out that predator avoidance was another quiet benefit of underground life. Large animals hunt by sight and smell, but buried shelters mask both. Fires burn low, smoke disperses through soil. Tracks disappear quickly. The earth hides you the way it hides everything, eventually. There is ongoing disagreement in academic circles about whether underground living significantly reduced predation risk or if that benefit is overstated. Some predators dig after all, but you notice something undeniable. Attacks are rarer, nights feel less tense. Fear becomes a background hum instead of a constant scream. The sounds underground change as animals move nearby. A soft thump, a scrape, a pause. You learn to identify which noises matter and which fade into harmless rhythm. This attentiveness sharpens your senses. You are becoming part of the subterranean ecosystem, not separate from it. You remember earlier shelters that failed. Roofs too thin, walls too straight, entrances too wide. Animals did not make those mistakes. Their dens curve, their tunnels twist, straight lines collapse, curves distribute pressure. You begin to mimic that shaping walls that bow gently inward, ceilings that arch rather than flatten. There is something humbling about this realization. Intelligence does not always announce itself with words or tools. Sometimes it digs quietly and survives. As days pass, you notice fewer drafts, less frost creeping along the floor. Your shelter feels more alive, responsive, almost organic. It settles as the soil shifts, adjusts as temperatures change. Above-ground structures fight nature. Underground ones cooperate. A small but telling find from ancient sites supports this. In several regions, early pit houses were abandoned and reused by animals after humans moved on. The design worked well enough that other species recognized its value. Shelter is shelter regardless of who builds it. You lie back and listen again. The earth carries vibrations softly. Footsteps become murmurs. The chaos of the surface world dissolves into manageable signals. This is not isolation. It is selective connection. As winter tightens its grip, you feel a strange kinship with the creatures beneath you. You all chose the same answer to the same question. How do you endure when the world above becomes hostile? The answer is simple and ancient. You go down, you tuck yourself into the quiet layers of the earth. You borrow strategies that worked long before you had language for them. And in doing so, you survive another night wrapped not just in soil, but in shared instinct. You begin to realize that digging is not always the first step downward. Sometimes the earth has already done the work for you as winter presses harder. Your attention turns toward the dark openings scattered across hillsides and cliff faces. Caves wait quietly unchanged by storms, offering space without the exhausting labour of excavation. Long before villages took shape, these hollowed places became winter refuges. You step inside one cautiously. The air shifts immediately. It smells older than the world outside, heavy with mineral dampness and time. Your footsteps echo softly, then fade. The temperature steadies almost at once. Not warm exactly, but mercifully consistent. This is where many early humans first experienced the underground advantage, without yet understanding how to recreate it elsewhere. Archaeological finds from sites such as Chauvet and Altamira confirm that caves were used not just for art but for shelter during harsh climatic periods. That is a firmly established point. Ash layers, tool fragments, and food remains tell a quiet story of repeated occupation. These were not brief stops. People returned here when the cold demanded protection. Caves offer something pit houses cannot, at least at first: height, space, natural strength. The ceiling does not threaten to collapse if you misjudge a wall. Stone arches hold themselves up effortlessly. You feel small inside them, but also safe. The earth above carries the weight of snow without complaint. There is an unusual detail that often surprises modern readers. Some caves show signs of internal rearrangement. Stone slabs dragged to block drafts. Walls of stacked rock built inside larger chambers to create smaller, warmer zones. You are not just hiding in caves, you are modifying them slowly, turning natural features into intentional homes. As you sit near this cave wall, the cold stone presses against your back. It draws heat from you, but not aggressively. The deeper you go, the less the outside world matters. Wind noise disappears entirely. Snowfall becomes irrelevant. You could sleep through a blizzard and never know it happened. Researchers continue to disagree on whether caves were preferred over built shelters or simply used when available. Some argue caves were ideal but rare, forcing most groups to dig their own spaces. Others believe caves carried risks, including rockfall and poor air circulation, making them less desirable than controlled pit houses. You sense both truths. A cave is a gift but demanding one. Fire behaves differently here. Smoke pulls against the ceiling, clinging stubbornly before finding its way out through cracks. You learn quickly where to place the hearth, how small to keep the flame, when to let it die. Too much smoke brings headaches and coughing. Too little heat invites misery. Balance becomes instinct. The walls of the cave tell stories if you pay attention. Scratches from animals who sheltered here before you. Soot marks layered over older soot marks, generations of fires stacked invisibly. You are not the first, you will not be the last. That continuity is oddly comforting. There is a detail that borders on the eerie. Some caves used for winter shelter also contain human handprints pressed into the stone, created by blowing pigment over an outstretched palm. These were not decoration in the modern sense. They were presence. Proof that someone survived long enough to leave a mark in the darkness. Living in a cave reshapes how you think about space. The outside world feels vast and unpredictable. Inside, boundaries are clear. Walls are known. Shadows repeat themselves. This predictability eases the mind. Anxiety fades into routine. Winter feels less like an enemy and more like a condition to manage. Experts studying early cave use often note another practical advantage. Predators hesitate to enter narrow, echoing spaces they cannot easily maneuver within. Firelight flickers unpredictably against stone. Smoke irritates sensitive noses. You feel the difference at night. Sleep comes more easily when the dark itself feels guarded. Yet caves are not perfect. Water drips, floors stay damp, cold stone never fully warms. Over time you notice stiffness in your joints. Moisture seeps into bones. This is likely why caves were not permanent homes for everyone. They are sanctuaries, not solutions. The transition away from caves begins quietly. You start to miss control. The ability to choose where the entrance faces, how high the sleeping area sits, how thick the walls are. Caves offer protection, but they also dictate terms. Digging gives you authorship. Still, caves teach you the underground mindset. They prove the concept. They show you that the earth itself can be a roof, that survival does not require towering walls or open flames. It requires understanding the landscape and working with it. There is continued discussion among historians about whether early humans preferred caves culturally or simply tolerated them. Some evidence suggests caves carried symbolic meaning seen as womb-like or sacred. Others argue practicality ruled and symbolism followed later. As you sit in the half-light, it feels like both. Safety often becomes sacred by default. When spring eventually returns, you will leave. You always do. Caves are for extremes. For moments when the world above becomes too sharp, you step back into sunlight, changed, carrying lessons carved into muscle memory. As you look one last time into the dark mouth of the cave, you understand something important. Villages did not come first. Walls did not come first. Even houses did not come first. Shelter began with finding places where the earth already knew how to protect life, and that knowledge will not stay here. You will take it with you, shaping soil and stone elsewhere, recreating this feeling of safety in places where no cave waits. The underground story is just beginning. You leave the cave behind with reluctance, carrying its lessons in your hands and shoulders. Now the ground ahead of you is solid and unbroken, no generous hollow waiting to be occupied. If you want shelter, you must carve it yourself. This is where effort replaces luck and where tools become extensions of intention. You kneel and study the soil, frozen on top, softer beneath. You strike carefully with a stone edge, feeling the vibration travel up your arm. Each impact sends a dull thud into the earth, followed by a faint crack as compacted layers give way. Digging is slow, but it is honest. Every inch you gain is earned. Archaeological discoveries from Paleolithic and early Neolithic sites show clear wear patterns on stone tools consistent with repeated digging and scraping. This is a well-accepted finding. Tools were not only for hunting, they were for shaping space itself. Survival depended as much on shelter as on food. You switch grips often. Bone tools for scraping, antler picks for prying, flat stones for smoothing. There is rhythm to the work. Strike, clear, test the wall, adjust. You learn quickly that straight lines are enemies underground, corners collapse, curves endure. The earth seems to prefer them. A small but intriguing detail emerges from tool studies. Some digging implements show signs of deliberate polishing on the handles, suggesting that they were used for long periods and valued enough to maintain. This was not frantic digging in moments of panic. It was planned labour repeated season after season. As the pit deepens, sound changes. The open air dulls. Your movements echo softly. The space begins to feel separate from the world above. You pause often, listening for cracks or shifting soil. The earth gives warnings if you pay attention. Researchers remain split on whether early pit houses were dug by individuals or as group efforts. Some sites suggest communal labour with standardised dimensions and shared layouts. Others look improvised, shaped by a single family's needs. You imagine both scenarios. Digging alone in silence or working side by side, passing tools, sharing breath clouds in the cold air. Your hands blister. Your shoulders ache. This is not romantic work. It is repetitive and unforgiving. But with every layer removed, the wind loses its reach. The pit becomes a bowl of stillness. Even before it is finished, you feel relief. You reinforce the walls with whatever is available. Stones pressed into softer soil, wooden supports wedged carefully, nothing elaborate. Just enough to keep gravity patient. The roof will come later. For now, depth is protection. There is an odd detail found in several ancient pit dwellings that speaks to this stage. Some pits show false starts, abandoned holes nearby, shallow and collapsed learning scars in the landscape. You can almost feel the frustration. Dig, fail, start again. Experience leaves its mark in negative space. The smell of freshly turned earth fills the pit. Damp metallic alive. It clings to your hands and clothes. That smell becomes familiar, almost comforting. It means progress. It means shelter is becoming real. Experts studying early construction often note that tool choice varied with soil type. In looser ground, broad scraping tools dominate. In compacted earth, pointed implements appear more frequently. This adaptability suggests a deep familiarity with local landscapes. You're not just digging anywhere, you're reading the ground. As you shape the interior, you begin smoothing surfaces with deliberate care. A smooth wall sheds moisture better. It resists pests, it feels safer. Your fingers trace grooves left by earlier strokes, slowly erasing them. This is where labour turns into dwelling. There is ongoing discussion among historians about whether early underground shelters were planned before winter or dug reactively as cold arrived. Some evidence points to autumn construction with shelters waiting empty until needed. Other sites suggest frantic winter digging. Standing here sore and cold, you suspect the smart ones planned ahead. Winter punishes hesitation. You carve a shallow channel along the floor, guiding any meltwater away from the sleeping area. This simple feature appears again and again in ancient pits. Not glamorous but essential. Dryness is warmth's quiet ally. The roof begins as a framework of wood and bone, whatever spans the gap without collapsing. You lay branches close together, pack soil on top, seal it with the snow. The ceiling lowers the space, but warmth increases immediately. Smaller volumes are easier to heat. You accept the trade. A peculiar detail emerges in some excavated shelters. Tool marks show deliberate roughening of certain surfaces likely to help packed soil adhere better. Smooth where it matters, textured where strength is needed. This is tactile knowledge passed through hands, not words. You crawl out briefly to stretch your body, protesting the effort. The open air feels louder now, harsher. You realize something has shifted. The surface world no longer feels like home during winter. It feels like something to escape. Academic discussions continue about whether early humans understood structural engineering or simply relied on intuition. The answer is probably neither and both. You do not calculate load distribution, but you feel when something is wrong. A creak, a crumble, you adjust. As dusk settles, you retreat into the pit. The entrance is small, intentional. You block it partially, leaving just enough space for air. Inside, the silence thickens. The ground seems to close around you, not threatening, but enclosing. You lie back against the newly shaped wall. It is imperfect, uneven, yours. Your hands made this place, or your effort turned open cold into contained calm. That realization brings a quiet pride, not boastful, just steady. Digging with stone tools teaches patience more than strength. You cannot rush the earth. You negotiate with it. And when you succeed, the reward is not admiration or beauty. It is the simple luxury of not shivering through the night. As the fire flickers weakly and the walls begin their slow work of holding warmth, you feel exhaustion pull you down. The shelter is not finished, but it is enough. Winter will test it. The earth will answer. And as sleep approaches, you understand that every stroke of stone against soil was part of a larger shift. Humans were no longer just passing through landscapes. They were carving themselves into them, one careful scoop at a time. You notice the smoke before you fully understand it. At first it feels like a problem, a mistake. The fire you so carefully nurtured now sends thin grey fingers curling upward, clinging to the low ceiling of your underground shelter. Your eyes sting, your throat tightens. Fire, which promised warmth and comfort, suddenly feels dangerous in this enclosed world. You sit very still and watch how the smoke behaves. It does not rush. It lingers. It searches. Eventually it finds a weak point near the entrance and slowly escapes as if reluctant to leave the warmth behind. This is where underground living forces you to learn a new kind of patience. Fire is no longer something you simply light. It is something you negotiate with. Finds from early subterranean dwellings show clear signs of controlled hearths placed carefully away from walls and entrances. Ash layers appear thin and repeated rather than thick and chaotic. This tells a simple story. People learn to burn small fires often, not large fires rarely. That adjustment mattered. You experiment. Less fuel, drier wood. You let the fire breathe, then smother it gently. The heat remains longer than the flame itself. The earth absorbs it, holds it, releases it back slowly. You begin to trust that process. Fire becomes quieter, more respectful. One overlooked discovery from several pit houses reveals small ventilation shafts angled upward, barely wide enough for smoke, but too narrow for cold drafts. They're easy to miss in excavation records because they collapse easily over time. When intact, they speak volumes. Someone understood airflow well enough to shape it underground. As the shelter warms, sound changes again. The crackle of fire echoes softly, then settles. The walls seem to listen. Outside the wind howls, but inside the noise feels distant and unimportant. You realize something subtle but profound. Fire underground is not just about heat. It is about creating a center, a point of focus in the dark. Interpretations differ when researchers consider whether these early hearths served primarily practical or social roles. Some argue they were strictly functional, limited by air quality concerns. Others suggest they became gathering points for storytelling and shared meals. Sitting here watching embers glow, you suspect the line between practical and social did not exist. Warmth draws people together whether they plan it or not. The smell of smoke becomes part of daily life. It clings to hair and hides. It settles into soil. It's not pleasant, but it is familiar. Smoke means safety. It means predators hesitate. It means food cooks. It means darkness is held at bay. There is a quietly strange detail preserved in some ancient shelters. Charcoal fragments mixed with certain plant residues suggest that aromatic herbs may have been burned alongside a fuel. Not enough to mask smoke entirely, but enough to change its character. Perhaps it eased breathing. Perhaps it calmed nerves. Or perhaps someone simply preferred the smell. Even underground comfort mattered. You learn quickly where to sit, where smoke pools, where air feels freshest. The shelter becomes mapped not by sight but by sensation, warm zones, cool corners, breathing spaces. Your body memorizes these without conscious effort. Firelight behaves differently underground. Shadows stretch and bend along curved walls. Faces look unfamiliar in the flicker. The ceiling feels closer at night. Yet there is intimacy in this emitted glow. The darkness beyond the fire feels thick but not hostile. You're enclosed, not trapped. Some specialists point out that underground hearths likely reduced fuel consumption significantly during winter months. With less heat escaping, smaller fires achieved the same effect as roaring surface blazes. This efficiency mattered deeply in landscapes stripped bare by cold. Firewood was precious, waste was dangerous. You notice how embers continue to radiate warmth long after flames fade. You push them gently aside, spread them thin, let the heat linger without smoke. Sleep comes easier when the fire whispers instead of shouts. There is no universal agreement on how early people balanced ventilation with warmth. Too much airflow steals heat. Too little steals breath. The solutions varied by region, soil, and season. That variety itself is telling. Underground living was not a single invention. It was a collection of local answers to the same relentless question. You lie back and listen to the faint hiss of cooling embers. The smell of earth and ash blends into something you sit with rest. Your chest rises and falls slowly. Each breath feels deliberate, safe. Fire also changes time perception. The cycle of tending embers becomes a rhythm marker. Before sleep, before waking, before eating. Days lose their sharp edges underground, but fire brings gentle structure. One small but intimate find supports this idea. In a few shelters, hearths appear rebuilt in the exact same spot across multiple seasons, even when other parts of the shelter shifted. That consistency suggests memory, tradition, a sense that this place mattered. As you drift closer to sleep, you realize that underground fire teaches restraint. You cannot let it grow wild. You cannot ignore it. You must attend without obsessing. It mirrors winter survival itself. Outside the storm may rage unchecked. Inside the fire glows low-contained patient. The walls hold its warmth like a secret. Smoke curls lazily upward and disappears. Silence returns. You close your eyes knowing the fire will fade soon, but its work will continue. The earth will hold what it was given, and you will rest breathing slowly, wrapped in soil and shadow, warmed not by flame, but by the quiet cooperation between human effort and the ground beneath you. You wake to a sound that barely registers as sound at all. It's more like pressure, a low continuous presence pressing down from above. The wind has returned stronger this time, but you only know it because the walls murmur faintly, carrying vibrations rather than noise. Underground storms lose their drama. They become background conditions instead of events. You lie still for a moment, listening. The roar that would normally dominate your thoughts arrives softened, filtered through layers of soil and stone. It feels distant, almost polite. This is one of the most immediate advantages of living below the surface. Sound loses its sharp edges. Fear loses its urgency. Excavations of ancient winter dwellings consistently show that many were positioned in exposed landscapes where surface shelters would have been battered relentlessly by wind. That choice seems intentional. Below ground, even the fiercest storms could pass without tearing roofs away or collapsing walls. The earth absorbed the violence quietly. You crawl toward the entrance and peek outside. Snow drives sideways across the plain. Ice crystals sting your face instantly. You retreat without hesitation. Inside, the temperature barely changes. The contrast is startling. It reinforces the wisdom of staying low. There is a small but telling observation from several northern sites. Wind erosion patterns around ancient pit houses are often uneven with deep scouring on the surface, but remarkably stable soil just a short distance down. This suggests people understood not just that underground was warmer, but that it was calmer. Calm matters when survival is fragile. As the storm continues, you notice how your shelter responds. The packed earth roof presses down, slightly settling under the weight of snow. It does not collapse. It compresses, becoming stronger. Snow itself adds insulation, sealing cracks and muffling sound even further. The storm becomes part of the shelter rather than a threat to it. There is an odd comfort in knowing the wind cannot see you. It rages blindly above, unaware of the small pocket of life beneath it. You feel invisible in the best possible way. Interpretations differ when specialists discuss whether early humans deliberately chose underground living to escape noise or whether silence was simply a byproduct of warmth. Some suggest constant exposure to wind noise was mentally exhausting, and that quieter spaces improved rest. Others argue physical protection came first. Lying here, listening to the softened world, you suspect rest itself was a survival tool. The shelter creaks faintly as temperatures shift. Wood contracts, soil settles. These sounds are gentle, predictable. They do not carry panic. You learn which noises matter, and which are simply the earth adjusting itself. You remember surface shelters from earlier winters, branch huts rattling violently, skins snapping in the wind, sleep broken by every gust. Underground sleep stretches longer, dreams deepen, your body repairs itself instead of bracing constantly for impact. A quietly surprising find supports this idea. Some ancient underground dwellings contain thicker bedding layers than surface sites from the same period. More plant material, more hides. It suggests people slept longer or valued rest more in these spaces. When the world above calms down, so do you. You sit up and tend the remnants of last night's fire. The embers are still warm. That should not be possible after such a long storm, yet the walls have guarded the heat faithfully. You add a small piece of fuel and watch it glow back to life without filling the space with smoke. There is ongoing discussion among researchers about whether underground shelters reduce stress and improved overall health. Skeletal evidence shows fewer signs of cold-related injuries in some populations that favoured earth-sheltered living. It is not conclusive, but it is suggestive. Comfort leaves marks on bones as surely as hardship does. The storm outside intensifies, then slowly begins to tire. Wind has a way of exhausting itself. Down here, you experience it as a gradual easing of pressure rather than a dramatic finale. The walls stop murmuring, silence thickens. You stretch and feel how your muscles respond. Less stiffness than you expected. Less ache. This shelter has done more than keep you alive. It has given your body a chance to recover. One detail that often escapes notice is how underground living changes smell during storms. Surface shelters fill with dampness and rot. Underground, the air stays relatively stable. Earth filters moisture. The scent remains familiar. Predictable smells are comforting when everything else feels uncertain. You lie back again, not because you are tired, but because there is no urgency to move. Time stretches softly underground. The storm will finish when it finishes. You do not need to witness it. As the last vibrations fade, you realize how completely the earth has rewritten your relationship with weather. Winter still exists, storms still rage, but they no longer dominate your senses. They become distant facts instead of immediate threats. This quiet is not empty. It is full of absence. Absence of wind, absence of panic, absence of constant vigilance. In that space, rest becomes possible. You close your eyes again, listening to nothing at all. Above you, clouds move on, snow settles, the world rearranges itself. Below you remain still, held gently by opaque soil and patience protected from the noise of survival itself. You begin to feel the pull of movement even in the depths of winter. Staying still keeps you warm, but survival has always required motion. As storms pass and cold settles into a steady presence, groups like yours begin to drift across the landscape following the animals' water sources and memory. What changes now is how you carry winter with you. Underground living does not anchor you to one place forever. Instead, it travels as an idea, wherever the land allows you to stop, dig, and disappear beneath the surface again. This pattern appears again and again across Ice Age migration routes. Material remains from Eurasia and North America reveal similar pit dwellings spaced along seasonal pathways, suggesting people carried knowledge of underground shelter with them as reliably as fire. You walk for days through frozen terrain, muscles stiff, breath sharp in your chest. When you finally stop, the ground feels familiar in your hands even though the land is new. Soil composition changes, stone quality shifts, but the logic remains. Down is safer than out. There is a striking observation from site studies scattered across the northern plains. Underground shelters appear at regular intervals, often near riverbanks or south-facing slopes. This placement was no accident. These locations offered easier digging, better drainage, and slightly warmer ground. Migration was not random wandering. It followed a quiet map written in terrain. As you dig again, you notice how quickly the process comes back to you. The rhythm returns. Your body remembers where to start, how deep to go, when to curve a wall instead of forcing it straight. Knowledge has settled into muscle memory. You do not need instructions, you need only soil and time. One unexpected detail found at several migratory sites hints at how far this knowledge travelled. Tool marks in distant regions match closely in angle and depth, despite thousands of miles between them. This suggests techniques were shared across generations and landscapes carried by people rather than discovered anew each time. Tradition, not coincidence. Academic opinion remains divided on whether underground shelters enabled longer migration ranges or simply made existing routes more survivable. Some researchers argue these dwellings allowed groups to push into harsher climates than ever before. Others believe migration would have occurred regardless, but underground living reduced loss along the way. Either way, the shelters mattered. Night falls early during these journeys. Darkness stretches. The ground freezes harder. Each time you retreat underground, you feel the same shift in your chest. Exposure fades. Safety returns. The earth becomes a temporary companion, reliable even when everything else is unfamiliar. Food storage becomes simpler underground. Frozen meat stays preserved. Roots remain edible. Scavengers struggle to find what you hide below. This consistency supports movement. You do not need to consume everything immediately. You can plan a little further ahead. There is a small but revealing find from one northern site. Layers of occupation show repeated use of the same underground shelters across multiple years despite long gaps between visits. This suggests people remembered these places and returned to them intentionally. The land held memory as much as people did. You imagine arriving at a familiar hollow after months away, snow covering everything, but beneath it your old shelter waits partially collapsed perhaps, but recognizable. You dig it out, repair it, settle in. The ground welcomes you back without judgment. Movement teaches flexibility. Some shelters are deep, others shallow, some circular, others oval. The form adapts to the moment. Underground living does not demand perfection, it demands responsiveness. Specialists studying migration patterns often note how underground shelters cluster near natural bottlenecks like valleys and passes. These were predictable routes for animals and humans alike. Digging in these areas allowed groups to wait out storms without losing position. Patience became a strategy. You wait underground as snow piles up outside. You listen for animals, you rest. When conditions improve, you move again. This cycle repeats across years, across lifetimes. One quietly human detail emerges from these sites. Small personal objects appear in temporary shelters, beads, carved bone, simple decorations. Even while migrating, even underground, people carried pieces of identity with them. Shelter did not erase culture, it protected it. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how these migration shelters were shared. Were they claimed by specific groups or left open for whoever arrived next? Evidence suggests a mix. Some were reused respectfully, others were abandoned entirely. Ownership was likely fluid, shaped by need more than law. As you rest in yet another earthen hollow, you reflect on how much trust you place in the ground. Each new place asks you to believe that soil will hold, that ceilings will stand, that warmth will linger. That trust is not blind. It is earned, reinforced by countless nights survived. The surface world rushes past in frozen flashes between shelters. Underground moments stretch longer, deeper. Migration becomes a series of pauses rather than a single relentless march. You drift towards sleep knowing that tomorrow you may move again. Another valley, another river, another patch of earth waiting to be shaped. The land changes, but the method remains. You go down, you wait, you endure. And somewhere above you, snow falls quietly unaware that beneath it human movement continues steady and patient, carried forward by the simple wisdom of choosing the earth when the sky becomes too cruel. You arrive at a place that looks wrong for winter shelter. The land stretches flat in every direction, a wide open steppe where wind has nothing to interrupt it. There are no cliffs, no caves, no trees tall enough to block the cold. At first glance it feels exposed, even reckless, and yet this is where you stop. You kneel and press your palm to the ground. Beneath the frozen crust the soil gives slightly. Grassy plains hide softer earth below, packed over centuries by roots and seasonal moisture. This is where pit houses quietly take over, turning open land into hidden refuge. Excavated settlement patterns across Eurasian steppe regions reveal clusters of shallow underground homes dating back thousands of years. These were not isolated experiments. They formed seasonal communities in places that appear at first glance impossible to inhabit during winter. You begin digging where the slope dips just enough to break the wind. Even a small depression helps. The ground cooperates, the soil peels back in thick layers, damp and heavy. You work steadily, shaping a low circular space that disappears into the plain. The design here differs from deeper pits elsewhere. The walls are thicker, the roof sits closer to the ground. Everything prioritizes insulation over space. You're not trying to stand upright, you're trying to stay warm. A quietly revealing feature appears in many steppe dwellings. The entrance tunnels are often longer and narrower than those in forested regions. This creates a cold trap, allowing frigid air to sink away from the living space. It is an elegant solution that requires no extra materials, only careful shaping of earth. You crawl inside and feel the difference immediately. Wind noise vanishes. The vastness outside collapses into stillness. In a landscape defined by openness, you have created enclosure. There is still no settled view on whether these steppe pit houses were used by extended families or smaller groups rotating through them seasonally. Some layouts suggest communal living. Others feel intimate, almost private. You imagine both scenarios unfolding under the same endless sky. Life on the steppe demands awareness. Predators roam freely. Storms arrive without warning. Underground living offers protection not through invisibility, but through humility. You remove yourself from the wind's reach rather than trying to confront it. One small but telling detail emerges from excavations in these regions. Floors are often carefully compacted and sometimes layered with plant matter, suggesting people value dryness and comfort even in temporary shelters. These were not desperate holes. They were planned spaces. You light a small fire and notice how quickly the space responds. Heat lingers. Smoke creeps slowly toward the entrance tunnel and disappears. The earth holds warmth close even here where winter seems endless. Specialists studying steppe cultures often note how underground shelters allow people to maintain social life despite extreme exposure. You could gather, talk, share food, even laugh without shouting over the wind. The shelter created a pocket of normalcy in a hostile environment. As night falls, the steppe transforms into a frozen ocean. Wind ripples across snow like waves. You feel none of it. The roof above you carries the weight quietly. Snow piles up, adding insulation rather than danger. There is a point of uncertainty that continues to divide interpretation. Some researchers believe these pit houses marked early steps toward permanent settlement on the steppe. Others argue they were purely seasonal, abandoned as soon as weather allowed. The evidence supports both readings depending on the site. You lie back and stare at the low ceiling barely visible in firelight. It feels close but not oppressive. The scale matches the need. You do not require grandeur, you require survival. The smell inside is a mix of earth and smoke, faintly grassy from the soil itself. It reminds you that even here life pushes up from below. Roots tangle just beyond the walls. Insects wait in deeper layers. The ground is not empty. A personal trace appears in one excavated dwelling from this region. A small carved bone pendant found near a sleeping area worn smooth from handling. Someone held it often. Perhaps for comfort, perhaps for memory. Even in the middle of nowhere, people carried pieces of meaning with them. You drift into sleep as the wind continues its endless movement above. Down here, the steppe loses its power. It becomes just another layer pressing gently against the roof, another element turned from threat into ally. When morning comes, you will crawl back into that vast open world, small against the horizon. But for now, the earth has folded around you, turning the most exposed landscape imaginable into a place where life can pause warm and endure. You wake surrounded by breathing. Not loud, not urgent, just the quiet rise and fall of others sharing the same underground space. In a shelter this small, no one is truly alone. Bodies cluster for warmth, shoulders brush in the dark, and every movement is felt by someone else. Underground winter life is not solitary, it is deeply social. As eyes adjust to low light, you become aware of how carefully the space has been arranged. Sleeping areas line the warmer edges. Tools rest in predictable places. Food sits close enough to reach without standing. This order is not accidental. It grows from living close, where chaos would quickly become dangerous. Evidence from excavated pit houses across multiple regions shows repeated patterns of internal organization. Hearths sit near the center. Sleeping spaces cluster nearby. Storage occupies cooler corners. These layouts appear again and again, suggesting shared expectations about how underground life should function. You shift slightly, careful not to wake anyone. Sound carries easily in enclosed spaces. Even a small movement feels amplified. Over time you learn restraint. Gestures become smaller, voices lower. Living underground trains you in subtlety. There is a small but revealing detail found in several communal shelters. Uneven wear on floor surfaces suggests people favoured specific paths moving around each other in familiar ways. This was not random crowding. It was choreography learned through repetition. Tension exists here too. Proximity magnifies everything. Hunger feels sharper. Irritation has nowhere to go. You learn quickly which habits soothe and which provoke. Patience becomes a survival skill as important as fire or food. Anthropologists examining these spaces often note how shared shelters likely reinforce social bonds. Winter isolation above ground might fragment groups, but underground living pulled people inward. Stories were told, skills were passed down, memory thickened in the dark. Yet there is no universal agreement on how harmonious this closeness truly was. Some interpretations suggest frequent conflict, especially during long winters with limited resources. Others emphasize cooperation as the only viable strategy. The truth likely shifted with circumstance, mood, and hunger. You notice how warmth spreads differently with many bodies present. The air feels thicker, softer. Breath clouds merge and fade together. Even without fire, the space retains heat longer when shared. Biology becomes architecture. One quietly human trace appears in some dwellings. Small partitions made of hides or woven materials creating minimal privacy within shared space. These barriers offered little soundproofing, but they mattered. Even underground, even in winter, people needed moments of separation. You listen to the sounds of waking, a soft cough, a shift of weight, someone feeding embers back to life. These sounds feel intimate grounding. Above ground, winter isolates. Below it binds. Meals become social anchors. Eating together conserves fuel and time. Food tastes better when shared, or perhaps hunger sharpens gratitude. Underground meals are slow affairs. There is nowhere else to be. Researchers studying social behaviour in early winter settlements often point out how shared hardship accelerates trust. You rely on each other completely. Someone tends the fire while another repairs the entrance. Roles emerge naturally. Competence earns quiet respect. You stretch carefully, mindful of limited space. Muscles feel warmer than they would outside, less stiff. The shelter has done its job, not just physically, but socially. It has kept the group intact. There is a moment of silence before the day truly begins. Everyone awake, no one speaking yet. In that pause, you feel the weight of shared presence. The shelter holds not just heat, but relationships. Some scholars suggest that underground living may have influenced early social structures, encouraging cooperation over hierarchy during winter months. Others argue leadership still emerged clearly in confined spaces. Evidence supports both possibilities. Stress reveals character quickly. As the fire strengthens, light spreads slowly across faces. Familiar expressions emerge from shadow. These are the people you will endure winter with. Underground life makes that reality unavoidable. You think briefly about surface shelters scattered and separate. How easy it would be to withdraw, to isolate. Underground withdrawal is not an option. You must engage, you must adapt. One small artifact from a communal pit house captures this perfectly. A simple object passed between many hands worn smooth on all sides. Ownership blurred. Use mattered more than possession. As the day unfolds within the shelter, you understand that underground winter living did more than protect bodies from cold. It reshaped how people related to one another. It compressed society into something denser, more immediate, sometimes strained, often supportive. You settle into the rhythm of shared space, listening, waiting, participating when needed, resting when possible. The earth holds all of you equally. Above the steps stretches empty and unforgiving. Below, life continues in close quarters, warm with breath and familiarity. Underground winter does not just change where you live, it changes how you live together. You notice how carefully food is handled down here. Nothing is casual, nothing is wasted. Underground living changes your relationship with what you eat. Not because food tastes different, but because the space itself demands intention. Every movement, every choice carries weight in a shelter where winter presses in from all sides. You reach toward a shallow pit carved into the floor near the wall. Inside, wrapped in hides and plant fibres, are pieces of meat frozen firm, preserved by cold earth rather than open air. The temperature here barely shifts. It stays just low enough to slow decay, just stable enough to prevent repeated thawing. This is not guesswork. It is learned practice. Recovered remains from ancient underground dwellings frequently include storage pits, placed deliberately away from hearths and sleeping areas. This pattern appears across multiple regions and time periods, pointing to a shared understanding that food needed cool, dark stability to last through winter. You kneel and feel the air near the storage area. It's colder, heavier. The difference is subtle but consistent. You understand now why these corners matter. Underground space is not uniform. It has microclimates. You learn to read them with your skin. Something small but revealing shows up in several excavations. Some storage pits were lined with bark grass or ash, creating an extra barrier against moisture and pests. These layers required effort to gather and maintain, suggesting people planned for long-term use rather than emergency hoarding. You think about how exposed food would be above ground. Scavengers, spoilage, wind-driven snow-bearing supplies beyond reach. Underground, everything stays close protected by soil and routine. You know exactly where each item rests. Order brings peace of mind. There remains disagreement over whether underground storage was primarily about preservation or concealment. Some researchers believe hiding food from animals and rival groups mattered more than temperature control. Others argue preservation was the driving force. As you sit here, both explanations feel inseparable. Hidden food lasts longer. Preserved food is easier to hide. The smell near the storage pit is faint but distinct. Cold meat, dried plants, earth. It does not trigger hunger immediately, it signals security. You can afford to wait. That knowledge softens anxiety. Meals are planned with care. You do not cook everything at once, you take what is needed. Underground storage allows restraint. You do not have to feast or starve. You can pace survival. One overlooked detail from a northern site offers insight into this rhythm. Cut marks on animal bones suggest repeated, careful removal of small portions rather than large butchering events. This implies food was accessed gradually, aligned with the idea of underground storage supporting steady consumption. You watch someone retrieve a portion of meat and replace the coverings, carefully sealing the pit again. The gesture feels ritualistic, though it is purely practical. Routine creates reliability. Reliability creates calm. Researchers examining winter survival strategies often note that underground storage reduced the need for constant hunting during dangerous weather. This shift allowed people to conserve energy and avoid exposure. Staying alive sometimes means knowing when not to move. You feel that truth settle in your body. There is no rush. Outside, the world is hostile. Inside, patience pays. There is an unresolved question that continues to shape interpretation. Some specialists wonder whether underground storage spaces doubled as symbolic zones associated with abundance and future security. Others see no evidence for ritual meaning. Standing here surrounded by quiet care and repetition, you sense that meaning does not require ceremony. It grows from trust in tomorrow. The shelter smells different after food is prepared. Warmth, fat, to smoke, these scents mix with the cooler storage air, creating layers of experience. Underground living sharpens your awareness of such changes. Smell becomes information. You finish eating slowly, there is no reason to hurry, digestion feels easier in warmth. Muscles relax, the fire burns low. The storage pit remains sealed, waiting. One intimate trace found in some shelters underscores this closeness to food. Small personal marks scratched near storage areas, lines or symbols repeated over time. They might track portions, they might mark ownership, or they might simply reflect habit. Someone stood here often enough to leave a mark. As you lean back against the wall, you realize that underground storage does more than protect food. It protects attention. You're not constantly scanning the horizon for danger or opportunity. Your focus turns inward toward maintenance rather than acquisition. Winter becomes something you manage rather than fight. You store, you wait, you consume thoughtfully. The earth supports this slower rhythm, holding both warmth and nourishment without complaint. Above ground, animals roam restlessly, searching for scarce resources. Below you sit surrounded by quiet abundance, measured not in excess but in sufficiency. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the shelter breathe around you. Food rests safely beneath the floor. Warmth lingers in the walls. The future feels closer, less threatening. Underground living teaches you that survival is not always about finding more. Sometimes it is about keeping what you already have carefully, patiently, until the world above softens its grip. You begin to notice that not everything done underground is strictly practical. Some actions linger a little longer than necessary. Some spaces feel different, treated with care beyond survival. In the quiet stretch of winter, when movement slows and nights feel endless, meaning starts to gather in the dark. Near the far wall of the shelter, away from the fire and storage pits, there is a shallow recess smoothed more carefully than the rest. Hands have passed over it again and again, pressing soil until it holds a gentle curve. Nothing is stored there, no tools rest within it. Yet it remains clear, respected, untouched by clutter. Material traces recovered from subterranean dwellings across Europe and parts of Asia indicate that certain underground spaces were used repeatedly for non-domestic activities. These areas lack food debris or heavy wear, but show signs of deliberate shaping and attention. Whatever happened there mattered enough to preserve space for it. You sit nearby and feel the atmosphere shift. Sound seems softer here. Even the fire feels distant. The earth holds silence differently in this corner, as if it expects something. You do not have words for ritual yet, but you recognize intention when you feel it. During long winters, as time becomes elastic, days blend together. Underground, without sunlight to mark hours, people begin to mark moments instead. A story told at the same place, a gesture repeated, a pause observed by everyone present. These patterns anchor the mind when the world outside offers no change. One easily missed feature uncovered in several ancient pit houses supports this idea. Small arrangements of stones, not structural and not decorative in any obvious way, appear near walls or entrances. They are too deliberate to be accidents. Someone placed them there. Someone else left them undisturbed. You watch as someone presses their palm against the earth, leaving a faint imprint in damp soil. It is not art in the way cave paintings are art. It is quieter, temporary. By morning the mark will fade, but the act itself matters more than permanence. Researchers examining early underground settlements often point out that winter confinement encouraged symbolic behaviour. When movement is restricted and danger looms outside, the mind turns inward. Expression finds new paths. The underground becomes not just shelter but stage. The evidence allows for more than one reading. Some interpret these spaces as spiritual centres, early forms of sacred ground. Others see them as social anchors, places for storytelling, teaching, or decision-making. Standing here, you sense no sharp boundary. Meaning and function overlap easily when survival is at stake. Firelight plays differently in this area. Shadows deepen, faces soften, voices lower without instruction. The shelter seems to agree with the shift. Even the earth feels like it is listening. A quietly personal trace appears in one excavation from a winter dwelling far north. A small depression in the floor holds remnants of pigment mixed with ash. No images remain, but the mixture suggests colour was once applied here, perhaps to skin, perhaps to objects, perhaps to the earth itself. Expression does not require an audience. Sometimes it requires only space. You think about how the underground changes belief. The sky is distant. Stars are hidden. Weather becomes a rumour carried through vibrations and sound. Down here, the earth is the dominant presence, solid, enclosing, protective. It is easy to imagine people attributing meaning to it, seeing it as guardian rather than obstacle. Interpretations remain open due to conflicting signs. Some underground spaces show repeated use over generations, while others appear briefly and are never returned to. Belief may have been fluid, adapting to place and circumstance, rather than fixed doctrine. You sit close to the wall and feel the cold earth through your clothes. It grounds you, literally. Thought slow. Breathing deepens. The shelter encourages reflection simply by limiting distraction. Storytelling thrives underground. Without much to see, imagination fills the space. Shadows stretch into shapes. Voices echo just enough to feel important. Elders speak. Children listen. Knowledge passes not through writing, but through repetition shaped by darkness and attention. One small human habit surfaces repeatedly in these settings. Objects handled during storytelling become worn smooth in specific places. A bone pendant, a carved stick. Something passed from hand to hand while voices carry memory forward. Touch reinforces words. Some researchers suggest that underground rituals helped manage fear during winter, giving structure to uncertainty. Others caution against projecting modern ideas onto ancient lives. The truth likely sits somewhere quieter. When danger cannot be confronted directly, people find ways to sit with it together. You notice how the shelter itself becomes participant. The walls catch echoes. The ceiling holds warmth. The earth absorbs sound and gives it back softened. Ritual here is not separate from environment, it is shaped by it. As winter deepens, these moments become more frequent. Not because there is more to say, but because there is more time to feel. Underground life slows everything except thought. A detail preserved by accident hints at continuity. In one shelter, successive layers of youth show the same small recess reshaped again and again, even as other parts of the dwelling changed. Whatever that space represented, it remained important enough to maintain. You realize that underground living did not strip life down to bare survival. It created room for meaning to gather. In the absence of sunlight and a movement, people filled the space with story gesture and shared silence. The fire burns low as someone finishes speaking. No one rushes to fill the pause. The quiet feels intentional, restorative. You lean back and close your eyes, feeling the earth press gently against you. Above, winter continues its long work. Below, people create moments that make endurance possible. Ritual does not always announce itself with ceremony. Sometimes it is simply the act of returning to the same place, touching the same wall, sharing the same cylinder night after night until the earth itself remembers you. Underground winter survival is not only about staying warm and fed, it is about staying human. And in these quiet spaces carved into soil and patience, humanity finds ways to speak softly even when the world outside cannot hear it. You become aware of danger differently underground. Above the surface, threats announce themselves with sound and movement. Footsteps crunch, shapes cross the horizon. Below ground, danger is something you sense rather than see. A vibration, a pause in familiar noise, a change in the way air moves through the entrance. You sit quietly and listen. The shelter feels still but alert. The earth does not hide you completely. It filters the world, reducing sharp signals into subtle ones. That subtlety becomes an advantage. Physical traces from early underground dwellings often show entrances designed to be deliberately awkward. Low openings, narrow tunnels, sharp turns just inside the threshold. These features appear consistently across regions, suggesting people understood that inconvenience could be protective. What slows you slightly can stop someone else entirely. You crawl toward the entrance and peer out carefully. From this angle, the outside world feels distorted. Sound arrives late. Vision is limited. Anyone approaching would have the same problem. Underground living turns the act of entry into a negotiation rather than an invitation. One small but telling feature appears in several excavated shelters. Stones positioned just inside entrances show signs of repeated movement, dragged into place and pulled aside again. These were not random rocks. They were barriers, simple and effective, controlled from within. Predators behave differently underground. Large animals hesitate at tight spaces. Their size works against them. Even human rivals lose confidence when they cannot see what waits inside. Darkness equalizes strength. Familiar terrain becomes power. Researchers examining settlement layouts often note that underground dwellings cluster in ways that allow shared vigilance. Shelters sit within sight of each other, entrances angled toward common paths. This arrangement suggests defense was collective, not individual. One person notices something, everyone responds. There is no single explanation that fully accounts for how often underground living reduced conflict. Some evidence suggests fewer signs of violent encounters at sites with extensive subterranean shelters. Other sites show no difference. Protection likely varied with circumstance. A shelter can hide you, but it cannot change human intent. You notice how silence becomes a tool. Fires burn low. Smoke disperses invisibly. Sound does not travel far through soil. At night, your presence barely registers beyond the entrance. Underground life favors those who move deliberately and wait patiently. A quietly revealing detail comes from a winter dwelling, where a shallow pit near the entrance contained broken tools and debris. Not trash, but obstacles. Objects placed to trip or slow anyone forcing their way inside. Defense does not always require confrontation. Sometimes it requires clutter. You think about surface camps from earlier seasons, how exposed they felt, how quickly safety depended on vigilance. Underground vigilance changes shape. You're not scanning horizons, you're listening for changes in pressure-vibration rhythm. Some interpretations suggest underground shelters were chosen specifically during periods of increased human conflict, offering concealment and escape routes. Others caution that evidence for this remains incomplete. Standing here pressed against the wall, you understand that safety rarely has one cause. It emerges from many small advantages layered together. You feel the thickness of the wall beside you. Soil packed hard, reinforced with stone. It would take time and effort to break through. Time you would hear, time you could respond to. The entrance tunnel bends slightly, forcing anyone entering to turn their body. That turn slows movement. It limits vision. You realize how intentional this is. Straight paths invite speed. Curves demand caution. One overlooked trace from a steppe region shows scrape marks along tunnel walls at shoulder height. These marks suggest repeated contact, perhaps from shields, tools, or bodies squeezing through. The tunnel did its job. It controlled access. You settle back into the shelter and let your breathing slow. Fear feels different here. Muted. Manageable. The walls do not promise safety, but they offer time. Time to react, time to decide. Fence underground is not about dominance. It is about uncertainty. Anyone outside cannot be sure what waits within. Darkness hides numbers. Silence hides readiness. Even a small group feels larger when unseen. Some specialists propose that underground living changed how conflict played out, shifting encounters from open confrontation to avoidance. If you can hide and wait, you do not need to fight. Survival favors restraint. You notice how children sleep closest to the center. Elders rest against the warmest walls. Roles shift subtly when danger feels distant. Protection becomes collective instinct rather than constant alarm. A small human trace reinforces this sense of shared defense. In one excavated shelter, handprints appear near the entrance at different heights, pressed into clay during construction or repair. Multiple people contributed to shaping the threshold. Everyone had a stake in keeping it secure. As night deepens, the outside world quiets. Any movement above would sound faint, distorted. You trust the shelter not because it is impenetrable, but because it buys you calm. Underground living teaches a quieter form of strength. You do not announce yourself. You do not challenge the world directly. You reduce your profile, your noise, your heat signature long before those words exist. You lie back and feel the ground hold steady. If something passes above, you may never know, and that ignorance feels like peace rather than vulnerability. Above ground survival often demands constant readiness. Below ground readiness becomes background. The earth does the watching for you. As sleep approaches, you understand that choosing to live underground during brutal winters was not only about warmth or food, It was also about choosing invisibility over confrontation, patience over panic. The shelter does not make you untouchable. It makes you harder to find. And in a world where danger travels on the wind, sometimes that is enough. You notice how the shelter feels different when new life arrives. The air seems heavier, warmer, charged with the quiet responsibility. Underground birth does not come with ceremony or announcement. It arrives softly folded into the rhythm of winter survival. Children are born here beneath packed soil and low ceilings in spaces shaped by many hands. This is not an exception. Excavation records from multiple prehistoric regions include infant remains and early childhood artifacts found within underground dwellings, indicating that these shelters were not only for adults weathering winter, but for families growing through it. You sit close to the wall and listen to a newborn's breathing. It is shallow, uneven, learning its own rhythm. Every sound feels amplified in the enclosed space. You realize how much effort goes into keeping this place calm. Voices soften, movement slow, fire is tended carefully. The shelter adjusts to fragility. Something quietly intimate appears in the archaeological record. In several underground homes, small impressions in clay walls match the size of infant hands or feet. These were not structural marks, they were pressed deliberately. Someone wanted to remember that this child existed even if winter took much from them. Raising children underground reshapes priorities. Warmth becomes non-negotiable. Smoke is controlled more carefully. The entrance stays sealed longer. You notice how sleeping areas shift, placing the youngest farthest from drafts. Architecture becomes caregiving. Researchers studying family life in early winter settlements often point out that underground living reduced infant exposure to extreme cold and wind. Mortality was still high by modern standards, but shelter mattered. A stable environment gave fragile bodies a better chance to grow. There is no single answer to how children experience these spaces emotionally. Some evidence suggests underground life fostered strong attachment and closeness. Other signs hint at stress from confinement and limited stimulation. The truth likely varied by season, family, and temperament. You watch older children move through the shelter with practiced ease. They know where to step, how to duck, how to stay quiet when needed. Underground life becomes normal to them. They do not remember the surface world as home during winter. This is home. A small but revealing habit shows up in several sites. Toys made from bone wood or stone appear near sleeping areas. Simple objects, smooth from handling, even underground, even during harsh winters, play persists. Life insists on itself. Teaching happens constantly. How to tend embers without smoke. How to pack soil so it holds. How to listen for changes in sound. Children absorb these lessons through observation long before words explain them. Knowledge passes hand to hand, breath to breath. Some specialists suggest that growing up underground may have shaped cognitive development, sharpening spatial awareness and sensitivity to sound. Others caution against drawing such conclusions from limited evidence. What is clear is that children adapted just as adults did. You feel how the shelter responds to many bodies. Heat lingers longer. Air thickens. The walls seem to hold more warmth when filled with movement and breath. Community reinforces architecture. There is a poignant trace found in one ancient dwelling. A small bundle placed beneath the floor, wrapped carefully, separated from daily life but kept close. It suggests loss handled gently. Underground spaces held grief as well as survival. You sense how winter changes parenting. There is less wandering, more closeness, less independence, more shared space. Children sleep within arm's reach. Comfort becomes collective. As weeks pass, routines form around care, feeding, resting, quiet play. The shelter becomes a cocoon, not just against cold, but against uncertainty. Outside winter remains unpredictable. Inside life continues deliberately. Some interpretations propose that underground living strengthened family bonds during the most difficult seasons. Others note that confinement could heighten tension. Both are likely true. Love and strain coexist easily when space is limited. You lie back and listen to soft breathing around you. The shelter feels alive, pulsing gently with shared presence. Children grow here learning the shape of safety before they learn the shape of the sky. When spring eventually arrives, these children will step into sunlight with curiosity rather than fear. Underground winters will be their earliest memory of warmth, closeness, and endurance. The earth will have held them at their most vulnerable, it will have given them time, and as sleep settles over the shelter once more, you understand that choosing to live underground was not just about surviving winter. It was about allowing life to continue quietly and stubbornly even when the world above seemed determined to freeze it out. You feel the shift before you see it. The air smells different, damp rather than sharp. The ground under your feet softens, losing its brittle resistance. Somewhere above, winter is loosening its grip even if it refuses to admit it yet. Underground change arrives quietly. Meltwater begins to trickle along the channels you carved months ago. It moves slowly, obedient to gravity and planning. The shelter does not flood. It adapts. This is the reward for patience and foresight. You prepared for this moment without knowing exactly when it would come. Across many cold regions, people who lived underground followed a seasonal rhythm that pulled them back toward the surface once the worst had passed. This pattern repeats so often that it feels less like a decision and more like instinct. Winter pushes you down, spring calls you back up. You crouch near the entrance and widen it slightly. More light filters in now, not much but enough to remind you what colour looks like. The pale blue of morning, the dull white of thinning snow. Your eyes squint, unused to brightness after so long in shadow. Something small catches your attention. A patch of earth near the entrance shows repeated smoothing fingers pressing and repressing the same place over many weeks. Now as you prepare to leave, that spot is brushed clean one last time. Habit lingers even when purpose fades. Leaving the shelter is not sudden, it happens in stakers. First, more time spent near the entrance, then longer trips outside, then days when you return only to sleep. The underground space slowly empties of urgency and fills with memory. You notice how different your body feels above ground now. The wind still bites, but it no longer feels personal. You have endured it from a place of safety. That changes perception. Hardship loses its authority once you know it can be escaped. What remains unclear is whether people felt relief or reluctance when abandoning underground homes. The traces left behind suggest both. Some shelters were carefully cleaned before departure. Others were left as there were tools and debris still scattered. Emotional attachment is difficult to read in soil, but patterns hint at choice rather than chaos. You begin dismantling parts of the roof. Branches are pulled free. Soil collapses inward gently. This is intentional. A partially collapsed shelter hides its entrance, protects it from animals, and preserves it for possible return. Leaving does not mean erasing. A quietly human detail appears as you work. Someone pauses to retrieve a small object from a wall niche. It has no survival value now. It is carried anyway. Underground life leaves imprints that travel with you. As days grow longer, the shelter feels cooler, damper. Its advantages reverse. What once held warmth now resists it. You understand that underground living is seasonal wisdom, not permanent retreat. The earth offers what it can when it can. You sleep one last night inside. The fire is smaller than usual. The silence feels different, less protective, more reflective. You listen to the walls one final time, memorizing the way sound settles here. Some interpretations suggest that repeated cycles of descent and emergence shaped how people understood time itself. Winter was not just cold, it was inward. Spring was not just warm, it was outward. Underground living gave structure to that rhythm. Morning arrives softly. You crawl out into light that feels too big at first. The world stretches. Colours return, distance matters again. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs without restraint. Behind you, the shelter sits quietly, half hidden, half remembered. It will wait, or it will not. Either outcome feels acceptable. You walk away carrying more than tools and supplies. You carry knowledge shaped by darkness and patience. You know how to disappear when needed. You know how to return. Underground life does not end here. It simply pauses, folded neatly into memory, ready for the next winter that demands it. As you move forward into thinning snow and open sky, you feel lighter, but not forgetful. The earth has taught you something enduring. Sometimes survival means stepping back into the light. Sometimes it means knowing exactly where to go when the light fades again. You travel farther now, carried by warmer days and restless feet, and you begin to notice how underground living changes shape depending on where you are. The idea remains the same, but the execution shifts with landscape materials and tradition. Winter may be universal, but the ground answers it differently in every place. In one region, the earth is soft and deep, easy to carve. Shelters sink low, their roofs barely visible above the surface. In another, rocky soil resists digging, forcing people to scrape shallow hollows and build low walls before covering them with packed turf. The ground sets the rules and you listen. Across the northern forests, underground homes blend wood and soil. Logs line the walls, their scent sharp and comforting. Moss fills gaps. Earth presses in from outside, sealing everything together. These shelters feel warmer, almost alive, breathing slowly with temperature changes. Farther north, where trees thin and soil freezes, hard snow becomes part of the design. Shelters are dug just deep enough, then capped with snow piled carefully to trap air. Inside, the light takes on a blue softness. The world feels hushed, insulated by frozen silence. People in wide river valleys shape their underground homes differently. Drainage matters more here. Floors slope gently, channels guide meltwater away. Raised sleeping platforms sit like islands above damp ground. The shelter becomes a negotiation with water as much as cold. Repeated settlement patterns across continents show that underground winter homes were not a single invention spreading outward. They appear again and again, adapted to local needs. This suggests the idea arose wherever winter pushed hard enough, shaped independently by people reading their own land. You notice details unique to each place. In some shelters, walls are etched with simple lines, perhaps marks of measurement or memory. In others, floors are polished smooth by generations of bare feet. These are not mistakes, they are signatures. The picture blurs when you try to trace exactly how these traditions influenced one another. Did travellers share techniques at seasonal gatherings, or did similar solutions simply emerge from shared necessity? The ground does not answer. It only holds the results. You step into a shelter carved into a hillside, its entrance facing the low winter sun. Light spills in during the warmest hours, warming the interior just enough. Orientation matters here. A few degrees make a difference when heat is scarce. Something quietly distinctive appears in one region. Shelters are grouped tightly, almost touching, while elsewhere they stand far apart. Closeness may reflect cooperation or crowding. Distance may signal privacy or caution. Both arrangements work depending on who lived there. You realize that underground living did not erase cultural identity. It expressed it. The way a wall curves, the way a roof meets the ground, the way space is divided. All reflect values carried through generations. In coastal areas, shelters incorporate stone more heavily resisting damp winds. Inland earth dominates. On open plains, depth matters more than material. Each choice tells a story about what winter threatened most in that place. Some observers suggest that these regional differences hint at early architectural traditions passed down long before writing. Others think variation simply followed available materials. Both ideas sit comfortably together. Skill travels through families as much as through necessity. You pause in a shelter that smells faintly of smoke and salt. It feels different from the forest earth you left behind. Not better, not worse, just shaped by another set of problems. One small human touch stands out. A low bench carved into a wall perfectly fitted to a sitting body. Someone sat there often, watched the fire, thought quietly. Even across cultures, comfort leaves familiar traces. As you move on, you carry these impressions with you. Underground winter living was not a single story, but many variations on the same theme. People listened to their land and responded with creativity grounded in survival. The earth offered protection everywhere, but it never offered it the same way twice. And in those differences, you begin to see how human ingenuity flourished not despite winter, but because of it. You step back into daylight, aware that beneath countless landscapes, hidden shelters once waited out the cold, each shaped by the same need, each quietly unique. You begin to appreciate how much skill hides beneath simplicity. From the outside, these underground homes look modest, even crude. A shallow depression, a low roof, an opening just big enough to slip through. But once you live in one, once you help shape one, you realize how much quiet knowledge is built into every curve and angle. There are no drawings, no measurements scratched into stone, yet shelters across distant regions share striking similarities in proportion. Walls lean inward just enough to hold pressure. Roofs span distances that wood and soil can actually support. Floors sit slightly above drainage channels. These are not accidents. They are solutions refined by repetition. Long before formal engineering existed, people were already making structural choices that worked. Underground homes stand because gravity is respected rather than challenged. Weight is distributed. Stress is softened by curves. The earth is allowed to do what it does best, which is stay put. You run your hand along a wall and feel the subtle slope. Straight walls would crumble here. Curved ones last. This is not theory. It is remembered failure turned into habit. Every collapse taught a lesson. Every standing shelter preserved it. Something small but revealing appears when you look closely at roof supports in certain regions. Branches are laid not randomly, but in overlapping patterns that spread weight outward. The method feels intuitive, yet it mirrors principles used in much later architecture. Knowledge does not always need language to survive. As you sit inside one of these spaces, you sense how pressure moves. Snow piles above, but the load transfers gently into the ground around you. The roof does not sag, it settles. This subtle difference keeps you safe. The question remains unresolved as to how consciously these design choices were taught. Did elders explain them, or did children simply learn by watching and doing? The past offers no clear answer. Both paths likely existed side by side. You notice how repairs are handled. Cracks are packed with clay before they spread. Supports are reinforced early, not after failure. Maintenance is constant, quiet, preventative. Underground living rewards attention more than reaction. One intimate trace speaks volumes about this care. In a long-used shelter, finger marks appear layered over each other where soil was pressed repeatedly into a weak spot. Many hands contributed. Many seasons passed. The wall still stands. You think about how different this is from building upward. Surface structures fight weather openly. They take pride in visibility. Underground homes accept invisibility as strength. Their success is measured by absence of collapse, absence of cold, absence of danger. People moving between regions would have carried these building instincts with them. Not written instructions, but a feel for balance, a sense of when a wall is too thin or a roof too flat. Skill travels quietly embodied rather than explained. Some interpretations suggest these early shelters influenced later above-ground construction, especially in how weight and insulation were managed. Others see them as separate traditions that faded once climates shifted. The truth may be layered like the shelters themselves. You stretch out and feel how evenly the space holds temperature. No cold corners, no sudden drafts. This consistency is not luck. It is the result of thoughtful design honed by generations who depended on it. A small design choice stands out. Many shelters include slightly roughened walls near hand height. Smooth enough not to crumble, textured enough to grip. This makes movement easier in low light. Even touch was considered. As you rest, you realize how much trust these structures require. You sleep beneath tons of earth without fear. That confidence is earned, passed down through shelters that held and held again. Engineering here is not about pushing limits. It is about knowing them, knowing how much the earth will bear, knowing when to stop digging, knowing that survival depends on restraint as much as ambition. You close your eyes and let the shelter do its quiet work. It does not impress. It does not announce itself. It simply exists stable and patient proof that deep understanding does not always need to be written down to endure. You sit quietly and sense a shift that has nothing to do with temperature or light. The shelter feels older now, not in years, but in intention. It's been repaired, adjusted, reshaped enough times that it no longer feels temporary. What began as protection has slowly taken on the weight of permanence. Some underground homes are returned to year after year. You can feel it in the smoothness of the floor worn down by countless steps. You can see it in the way the walls hold their curves confidently, no longer raw or freshly cut. This place remembers being lived in. In many cold regions, families return to the same winter shelters for generations, reinforcing the Adam each time, instead of starting from scratch. Entrances were repaired, roofs rebuilt, floors leveled again. The land became familiar in a way that went beyond navigation. It became known. You add another layer of packed soil to a weak spot in the wall, pressing it firmly with your palm. The motion feels ceremonial, though you know it is simply maintenance. Still, it connects you to the people who did this before you and those who will do it again. There is uncertainty wrapped around how permanent these underground homes truly were. Some were clearly abandoned after a few seasons, left to collapse and disappear. Others lingered, evolving, slowly growing sturdier over time. The ground does not explain why one endured and another did not. Circumstance likely mattered as much as intention. You notice how tools used for repair are kept close even during the warmest months. A digging stone rests near the wall. A bone scraper lies half buried in dust. Preparedness becomes habit when shelter matters this much. One small detail gives away how attached people became to these spaces. In one long-used dwelling, a shallow groove worn into the wall matches the height of a resting hand. Someone leaned there often, perhaps while thinking, perhaps while watching the fire. The mark was never smoothed away. Living underground long-term changes how you think about ownership. You do not possess the shelter in the way you possess a tool. You tend it, you care for it, it exists with you, not for you. As seasons pass, the shelter absorbs layers of memory. Smoke darkens the ceiling. Repairs thicken the walls. The floor rises slightly with each new covering. Time accumulates physically here. You can feel it under your feet. You begin to wonder whether these places were thought of as homes or simply winter skins shed each spring. The question does not resolve itself. Both ideas fit. A place can be deeply familiar and still temporary. The air inside carries a blended scent of old fires and earth. It never fully clears even when the shelter is empty. When you return after months away, the smell greets you like recognition. Children who grow up returning to the same underground space learn its shape before they learn the open land. They know where the walls curve, where the ceiling dips, where warmth pools. The shelter becomes part of their mental map of the world. You realize that permanence does not require stone foundations or towering walls. It can exist quietly renewed through care rather than monument. These underground homes endure not because they are indestructible, but because they are revisited. As you settle in for another winter night, you feel less like a visitor and more like a caretaker. The shelter holds you now, but it also waits for the next return, the next set of hands, the next layer of soil pressed gently into place. In that waiting, something stable emerges. Not ownership, not conquest, just continuity. You breathe in slowly and notice how familiar the smell has become. Damp earth, old smoke, a faint trace of dried plants. Underground scent lingers longer than sound or light. It settles into walls, seeps into clothing, and becomes part of how you recognize safety. Above ground, winter smells sharp and empty. Below it feels lived in. You move closer to the wall and press your face near it. The soil carries a cool mineral scent that never fully fades. Even after fire and bodies warm the space, the earth keeps its identity. It reminds you where you are. It reminds you what holds you. People who live through many winters underground learn to read these smells carefully. A sour note meant moisture creeping where it should not. Too much smoke meant the fire needed adjusting. Fresh earth meant a repair had been made recently. Smell became information long before it became memory. Across underground winter shelters, layers of scent built up slowly. Fire after fire, season after season. When a shelter was reopened after months of absence, its smell returned almost immediately as if it had been waiting. This consistency anchored people to place even before sight or touch did. You notice a small habit repeated without thought. Someone rubs soil between their fingers before pressing it into a crack. The smell confirms its texture and dampness. Dry soil will not bind. Too wet will slump. The nose decides before the hands do. There is something slightly unexpected about how comforting these smells become. What would feel unpleasant above ground feels grounding here. Earthy air signals protection. Smoke signals warmth. Even the faint musk of many bodies signals shared survival. Not everything is clear in the traces left behind. Some underground spaces seemed deliberately aired out before being closed for the season, while others were sealed with their smells intact. Whether this was preference or circumstance is hard to say. What remains is the sense that scent mattered. You settle near the fire and notice how warmth changes the air. Smells rise, blend, soften. Cold presses them back down. The shelter breathes in its own slow way, expanding and contracting with temperature. One small, almost invisible detail hints at this sensitivity. In some shelters, walls near the fire are smoother and darker, while those farther away remain rough and pale. This is not just smoke staining, it is the record of heat and scent interacting with earth over time. Children growing up underground learn these smells early. They know when to cough, when to move closer to the entrance when the fire needs less fuel. Their bodies respond before their thoughts catch up. You realize how deeply this sensory knowledge ties you to the shelter. Even in darkness, you would know where you are by smell alone. It becomes a map drawn in air instead of lines. When you eventually leave for the season, the smell clings to you. Your clothes carry it into the open world. Others recognize it instantly. It marks you as someone who has waited out winter beneath the ground. Above ground, fresh wind strips it away slowly. But part of it remains in memory. When winter returns and you dig again, the first breath inside feels like recognition rather than discovery. The earth smells the same wherever you go, but underground it smells like endurance. And as you rest breathing evenly, you understand that survival is not only seen or felt. Sometimes it is simply inhaled quietly and repeatedly until it becomes part of you. You begin to notice how your body feels after weeks spent underground. The cold no longer sinks as deeply into your joints. Your fingers stay flexible longer. Sleep comes more easily. Underground living reshapes health in quiet, uneven ways, offering relief in some places while creating new challenges in others. Your skin stays drier than it would above ground, protected from biting wind. Cuts heal a little faster when they are not constantly reopened by cold air. Warmth does not cure illness, but it gives the body a chance to recover rather than simply endure. People who survived repeated winters underground often showed fewer signs of frost damage than those who relied only on surface shelters. Stable temperatures mattered. Even a small difference could decide whether toes numbed beyond return or recovered by morning. Yet the shelter is not perfect. Smoke lingers, air grows heavy. You notice headaches when ventilation is neglected. Coughs echo longer in enclosed spaces. Underground life demands balance. Warmth traded for fresh air requires constant attention. You adjust the entrance covering, widening it slightly during the day, sealing it tighter at night. These small changes shape how your body responds. Too much air chills, too little suffocates. You learn to feel the difference instinctively. There is a small human habit that reveals this awareness. People sit or lie near the entrance when they feel unwell, letting fresher air wash over them without fully exposing themselves to the cold. The shelter becomes a gradient rather than a single environment. Bones recovered from underground winter settlements sometimes show less stress from cold exposure, but more wear from crouching and low ceilings. Knees ache, backs curve. Bodies adapt to confined spaces as surely as they adapt to temperature. It remains difficult to tell whether underground living improved overall health or merely shifted the types of strain people experienced. Warmth protected extremities, but confinement introduced new stresses. Survival often means choosing which hardships you can manage. You stretch carefully, mindful of the low ceiling. Muscles tighten if neglected. Movement becomes deliberate rather than free. You learn small exercises that fit the space. Squatting, leaning, rotating shoulders slowly. The shelter teaches restraint, not stillness. A quiet detail preserved in some shelters hints at care. Smooth stones placed near sleeping areas, likely used to massage sore muscles or warm stiff joints near the fire. Comfort does not require luxury, it requires attention. Illness spreads differently underground. Close quarters make separation difficult. When one person coughs, everyone listens. The group responds by adjusting routines, spacing, sleeping areas, slightly tending fires more carefully. Health becomes collective responsibility. Children adapt quickly. Their bodies bend and twist easily in low spaces. They learn early how to move without strain. Elders move less, conserving energy, staying close to warmth. Roles shift with age and ability. You notice how mental health shifts too. Fear fades, rest deepens. Yet confinement can press on the mind. Restlessness builds. Underground life offers safety but not endless comfort. Balance remains essential. When the shelter works well, you feel it immediately. Breathing steadies, muscles loosen, thoughts slow. When it fails, discomfort appears quickly. Underground living leaves little room for neglect. As you lie back and listen to the steady rhythm of breath around you, you understand that health here is not guaranteed. It is managed daily through small adjustments and shared awareness. The earth offers stability, but it demands respect. And in learning how to care for your body beneath it, you carry that knowledge forward, shaping how you survive not just winter, but the limits of your own endurance. You notice how stories change underground. Without a sky overhead, without the steady movement of sun and stars, memory stretches inward instead of outward. Words feel heavier here. They settle into the space carried by breath and shadow rather than distance. Someone begins to speak, not loudly, not formally, just enough to be heard. The fire responds with a small shift in flame as if acknowledging the moment. Faces lean closer. Even those half asleep listen. Underground there is little else to distract attention. Long winters spent below the surface gave rise to nights filled with shared stories. This is something that appears wherever people waited out cold seasons together. When movement stopped, language took over. Stories became tools for passing time, knowledge and reassurance. You listen as a tale unfolds about animals, about journeys, about mistakes that taught important lessons. The words are familiar, but the telling changes slightly each time. Details shift, emphasis moves. Memory is not fixed here. It adapts like everything else underground. There is a small moment that feels telling. As the story reaches a tense point, someone presses their hand against the wall, unconsciously grounding themselves in earth. The shelter participates, offering steadiness when imagination wanders. Children drift in and out of attention. They hear the rhythms even when they miss the meaning. Over time, those rhythms become memory. Stories learned underground carry a particular cadence shaped by low ceilings and close walls. Not everything that happened here was remembered clearly. Some stories blur merging events and people. Others sharpen repeated until they feel timeless. Underground living stretches nights long enough for memory to wander and settle in unexpected ways. You notice how voices lower naturally. Loud sounds feel unnecessary. Echoes soften speech, encouraging slower pacing. Storytelling becomes intimate by default. There is an odd trace left behind in some old shelters, small notches cut into walls at sitting height evenly spaced. They are not structural. Perhaps someone leaned there night after night, listening, marking time unconsciously. Habit leaves marks even when intention fades. You realize how much knowledge passes through these moments. Where to dig, how to seal a roof, when to move on. Stories carry practical lessons wrapped in narrative, easier to remember than instruction. Some tales are clearly meant to entertain, others warn, Others simply fill the dark. You sense that no sharp line separates them. In winter, all stories serve the same purpose. They keep people awake just long enough, calm enough, connected enough. As the fire burns low, pauses stretch between words. Silence becomes part of the telling. Underground, silence feels complete rather than awkward. You lean back and let the story wash over you. You're not just hearing it. You're sharing the space that shaped it. The shelter holds sound gently, preventing it from escaping too quickly. Words linger here. Memory behaves differently in darkness. Without visual distraction, images sharpen. You picture scenes more vividly, stories sink deeper. Eventually the voice trails off. No one rushes to speak next. The moment feels finished, not empty. This rhythm, this gentle rise and fall of shared attention becomes a feature of underground life. You understand that these stories are not performances, they are continuity. Each winter they return slightly altered, carrying the shape of survival forward. As you close your eyes, the last words echo softly against the walls and then settle into silence. The shelter remains patient and listening, holding not just warmth and bodies, but memory itself layered gently like soil over time. You become aware of movement that is not human. A faint rustle near the wall, a soft scratching sound that comes and goes. Underground life means sharing space whether you intend to or not. The earth is already inhabited. You are a guest even if winter makes you feel like an owner. Small animals find their way in, drawn by warmth and food. Mice slip through cracks you did not know existed. Insects emerge from deeper layers of soil when the shelter warms. You notice them more at night when sound carries farther and the world slows down. Living underground during winter made close contact with animals unavoidable. Wherever people dug into the earth, creatures followed, seeking the same protection from cold. This pattern repeats across many regions. Shelter attracts life. You learn to read the sounds. Light scratching means something small, cautious. Heavier movement suggests something bolder. You listen rather than react. Panic wastes energy. Most visitors mean no harm. They want warmth as much as you do. There is a quietly practical habit that emerges. Food is sealed more carefully. Storage pits are covered tightly. Loose scraps disappear quickly. Underground living sharpens awareness of how easily boundaries blur. You notice something odd but strangely useful. When several small animals nest near the walls, the air feels slightly warmer. Body heat accumulates. The shelter becomes a shared thermal pocket. Comfort comes with a cost, but in winter warmth matters. Not everyone welcomed these companions. Some shelters show signs of deliberate exclusion. Cracks filled carefully. Entrances narrowed further. Simple traps placed along walls. The balance between tolerance and control shifts with circumstance. You sit near the fire and watch a shadow dart along the edge of light. It disappears quickly, leaving no trace. Underground life teaches you to accept what you cannot fully manage. There are moments of irritation, chewed leather, scattered bedding, sudden noise in the night. You adjust routines, lift sleeping areas, rearrange storage. The shelter evolves in response. One small detail hints at this adaptation. In some old shelters, smooth stones line the base of walls, making burrowing more difficult. This was not decorative. It was defensive, shaped by experience rather than instruction. Animals change behavior underground. Predators hesitate. Prey grows bold. The usual rules of surface life soften here. Darkness levels the field. You realize how much patience this requires. Sharing space means surrendering some control. Underground living demands tolerance alongside vigilance. As winter deepens, interactions become predictable. The same sounds repeat, the same shadows appear. Familiarity reduces fear. Children learn quickly which noises to ignore and which to respect. They grow up knowing the difference between danger and nuisance. The shelter becomes a classroom in listening. You lie back and let the sounds blend into the background. Scratching becomes rhythm. Movement becomes reassurance that life continues. Above ground, animals struggle visibly. Below, they gather quietly hidden from the worst of the cold. Underground living creates accidental communities layered and unseen. As sleep approaches, you accept the presence of others sharing this space. The earth holds all of you equally. In winter, survival is not solitary. It is shared, sometimes reluctantly, often silently, always under the same protective ground. You begin to sense that winter is no longer the same winter it once was. The cold still arrives, but it lingers differently. Storms feel shorter. Thaws come serpullier, then retreat again. Underground, these shifts are subtle, but you feel them in the timing of meltwater, in how long warmth stays in the walls. The land itself is changing slowly, almost imperceptibly. Glaciers creep back. Ice loosens its grip. Across generations, people notice that winters are not always as brutal as the ones remembered in stories. Underground shelters respond to this change without needing to be redesigned. They simply adapt. For long stretches of human history, climate did not remain stable. Cold periods deepened, then eased. Underground living offered flexibility in the face of this uncertainty. When winters grew harsher, people dug deeper. When they softened, shelters became shallower or were used less often. You notice that some shelters are no longer repaired with the same urgency. Roofs are left thinner. Entrances widen sooner in the season. The underground remains an option, but not a necessity, every year. A small but telling moment reveals this shift. Someone pauses while packing soil and stops halfway, deciding it is enough. The wall does not need another layer. Experience has taught restraint as well as caution. You think about how knowledge adjusts with climate. Techniques once essential become optional. Others fade quietly. Underground living does not disappear suddenly. It loosens season by season. There are shelters you encounter that feel unfinished or lightly used. Floors show fewer layers. Walls hold fewer repairs. These places tell a different story, one of this transition rather than desperation. Memory grows less certain here. Some people recall winters spent entirely underground. Others remember only brief retreats. Stories overlap, disagree, gently blur at the edges. The past does not settle into one version. You realize that underground living was never about clinging to one solution forever. It was about responding to conditions as they were. When the land demanded retreat, people listened. When it allowed movement, they emerged. You sit near an entrance that stays open longer each day. Light spills in, air feels fresher. The shelter becomes a place to rest rather than hide. One quiet habit reflects this change. Tools once kept close for constant repair now drift towards storage or travel packs. Readiness shifts direction from enduring to moving. Children born during these milder years experience underground life differently. It is no longer the centre of winter, but a fallback, a remembered skill rather than a constant presence. You feel a mix of relief and uncertainty. Easier winters bring opportunity, but they also remove the clarity of routine. Underground living had structure. Change demands adaptation again. As seasons continue to shift, shelters begin to feel like choices rather than lifelines. They're still there, still useful, but not always necessary. You rest and listen to the earth one more time, aware that it has carried you through extremes and now allows you to step back into the open more often. The ground has not failed you. Has simply changed its role. Underground living fades not with abandonment, but with gratitude. The knowledge remains tucked away, waiting for the cold to return if it must. You walk past places that once held life and now hold only quiet. The land remembers even when people move on. Slight dips in the ground catch snow differently. Grass grows thinner where roofs once pressed down. These are not ruins in the dramatic sense. They are absences, subtle and patient. You stop where a shelter once stood. The entrance has collapsed, completely filled with soil and leaves. Only a faint hollow remains, just enough to trip an unwary foot. You kneel and brush the surface with your hand. The earth feels ordinary now, but it did not always. Across many landscapes, these shallow impressions remain long after winter shelters were abandoned. They mark places where people chose to disappear for a season, then return to the surface world. Time softens their edges, but it does not erase them entirely. You imagine the last night spent here. The fire allowed to die naturally, Tools packed away, bedding lifted. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet decision that this winter would end above ground. There is something strangely intimate about what gets left behind. A broken scraper half buried near the wall. A stone that fits the hand perfectly but no longer needed. These are not offerings. They are the small losses of movement. Some shelters feel carefully closed. Roofs deliberately collapsed inward. Entrances filled neatly. Others feel hurried left open to weather and animals. The difference suggests choice, not accident. People left when they were ready or when they had to. You notice how animals have reclaimed these spaces. Burrows cut through old walls. Roots push into packed floors. The ground does not stay empty for long. It fills itself again. Children growing up later walk across these places without knowing what they are. To them, the land simply dips and rises. Memory fades faster than Earth reshapes itself. You feel a quiet respect standing here. Not nostalgia exactly, more like recognition. These shelters did what they needed to do. They do not demand remembrance. In some places, abandoned shelters cluster together, forming ghostly neighborhoods. In others, they stand alone, one winter answer to one family's need. Both patterns linger differently. You step into a depression and feel how the wind still misses this spot. Even without walls, the shape holds a hint of protection. The land remembers function longer than form. One small detail catches your attention. A patch of soil remains smoother than its surroundings, resisting grass longer than expected. Countless bodies pressed it flat. Time has not quite undone that. You realize that abandonment does not mean failure. It means conditions changed. The knowledge moved on with the people. The shelter stayed behind as footprint rather than a home. As you walk away, you carry the sense that these places are not lost. They are simply quiet, folded back into the landscape that once held them open. The earth accepts this without complaint. It always does. You start to notice familiar ideas appearing in unfamiliar places. Thick walls that hold warmth. Windows set low or angled toward winter sun. Buildings that seem to sink into hillsides rather than rise above them. These shapes feel new, yet they echo something older, something learned long ago. As people begin to build differently over time, some of the quiet lessons from underground living surface again. Earth-covered homes, partially buried rooms, structures that trade visibility for comfort. The logic remains the same even when materials change. In many parts of the world, later communities continue to build with soil and stone, using the ground itself as insulation. From sod houses on windswept plains to hillside dwellings tucked into slopes, the instinct to borrow warmth from the earth never fully disappeared. You walk past a structure half buried in a hill and feel the same calm you knew underground. Sound softens. Temperature steadies. The building does not fight the land, it settles into it. There is something quietly amusing about how ideas return. Techniques once born of necessity resurface as choices. What was survival becomes design. You notice small details that feel familiar. Narrow entrances, thick thresholds, curved interior spaces. These features reduce drafts, hold heat, and create a sense of enclosure. The body responds the same way it always has. Not everyone remembers why these designs work. Some follow tradition. Others rediscover the benefits by accident. The past does not always announce itself. It waits to be recognized. You pause near a modern structure built partly underground and smile at the thought that this approach feels innovative again. The ground offers the same advantages it always has, only the language has changed. One small human habit persists. People still gravitate toward the warmest corner of a room, the place where walls meet and air stays still. The body remembers what the mind may not. As you move through these later spaces, you sense continuity rather than progress. The idea of shelter does not evolve in a straight line. It loops, revisits, adapts. You realize that underground winter living never truly ended. It simply changed names, shapes, and materials. The desire to be held by the earth remains constant. Standing there, you feel the long thread connecting past and present. People still seek quiet, stable warmth when the world grows harsh. They still choose to lean into the land rather than stand against it. The lesson endured because it worked. You hear stories now that feel exaggerated, stretched by time and distance. Tales of people who lived entirely below the surface, who never saw the sun, who whispered to the earth as if it answered back. These stories travel farther than the shelters ever did. They grow in the telling. As underground homes fade from daily life, memory reshapes them. What was once practical becomes mysterious. What was ordinary becomes hidden. People begin to speak of underground spaces as places apart from the living world above. You listen as someone describes a hill said to be hollow, filled with people who emerge only at night. Another story claims entire communities vanished beneath the ground, choosing darkness over sky. These stories are told with lowered voices, half belief, half warning. There is a quiet truth beneath the exaggeration. For long stretches of winter, people really did disappear from the surface. Smoke stopped rising. Tracks vanished. The land looked empty. To those passing through later, it must have seemed like magic or loss. You think about how easily absence becomes mystery. When no one sees you for months, imagination fills the gap. One detail repeats across many of these legends. Underground people are often described as warm, pale, and quiet, unbothered by cold or wind. It sounds less like fantasy and more like a memory softened into myth. As generations pass, the reasons for going underground blur. Warmth becomes secrecy, shelter becomes hiding, practical knowledge turns symbolic. You notice how these stories always carry a lesson. Do not wander in winter. Do not trust what you cannot see. Respect the ground. Fear and memory intertwine easily. Children listen wide-eyed, picturing worlds beneath their feet. The truth that their ancestors once lived that way is no longer obvious. It feels distant, unreal. You realize that underground living left no monuments to explain itself. No towering structures, no written accounts, only subtle traces and stories shaped by imagination. In some places, these myths attach to real depressions in the land. Collapsed shelters become entrances in the story. Ordinary hollows gain names and warnings. You stand near one such place and feel how quiet it is. The ground does not feel magical. It feels patient. It holds secrets only because no one asks it directly. The stories persist because they carry emotional truth even if details drift. Underground life was hidden. It was quiet. It required trust in what could not be seen. As you walk away, you understand how easily survival becomes legend once its context fades. People remember the mystery, not the method. And somewhere beneath your feet, the earth keeps its own version of the story layered in soil rather than words. You begin to notice something unexpected as seasons pass and winters soften. Some people do not rush back to the surface when they could. Even when the air warms and snow retreats, a few shelters remain occupied longer than necessity demands. Comfort has a way of persuading quietly. Underground life feels contained and predictable. The world above grows noisy again, full of wind insects and sudden changes. Down here, temperature barely shifts. Sound stays muted. Days feel longer, gentler. For some, that steadiness becomes preferable to openness. You sit near an entrance that stays half-sealed long after spring has arrived. Light spills in, but no one widens it further. The shelter remains cool and calm while the surface world grows restless. Choice replaces urgency. In certain regions, people continued using underground spaces well beyond winter, especially during unpredictable weather or times of uncertainty. What began as protection gradually became preference. The earth offered not just warmth, but control. You notice how routines persist. Fires burn low even when not needed for heat. Sleeping areas remain tucked against walls. The habits learned in winter do not disappear easily. They linger, shaping comfort long after danger fades. There is a quietly revealing moment. Someone steps outside, briefly squints at the brightness, then retreats back in without comment. The surface feels overwhelming. Underground feels manageable. Not everyone understands this choice. Some see it as caution, others as reluctance to change. The reasons differ from person to person. And for some, underground life feels safer. For others, it simply feels familiar. You think about how the earth buffers more than temperature. It softens sound, it limits sight, it reduces the number of decisions you must make. Fewer options can feel like relief after long hardship. Children raised through multiple winters underground sometimes hesitate in open spaces. They stay close to walls. They seek shade even on mild days. The shelter shapes their sense of normal. You realize that living underground teaches a certain trust in enclosure. The world feels less threatening when its edges are clear. Above ground distance invites uncertainty. One small habit gives this away. People continue to store belongings low and close even when there is no need to conserve heat. Proximity becomes comfort rather than strategy. As you rest, you consider how easily survival strategies turn into preferences. What saves you once can shape you forever. Underground life does not trap people physically. It settles into memory. Eventually most do return fully to the surface. Crops demand sunlight. Animals move. Trade resumes. But for a time the underground remains a chosen refuge rather than a forced one. You sit quietly aware that this place holds no danger now, only calm. The earth does not demand you stay, it simply allows it. And as you close your eyes, you understand why some lingered below longer than winter required. When the world feels uncertain, there is comfort in being held unseen by something that does not change quickly. You begin to reflect on what the ground has taught you, not in lessons spoken aloud, but in habits that settled into your body. You learn to move slowly, to listen before acting, to trust weight and pressure and patience. These lessons stay with you long after you leave the shelter behind. When you walk across open land, now you notice how quickly people rush, how often they build upward, exposing themselves to wind and cold without realizing there is another option. You carry a quieter knowledge, one shaped by seasons spent beneath the surface. Across generations, people who lived through underground winters passed on more than techniques. They passed on attitudes, a respect for limits, an understanding that survival does not always mean conquering an environment. Sometimes it means stepping aside and letting it pass. You remember how the shelter responded when storms pressed down, how it did not resist but absorbed. Snow added weight, yet also warmth. The earth pressed inward, yet held firm. There is wisdom in yielding just enough. One small moment captures this philosophy. You recall how cracks were never ignored, but never panicked over either. They were addressed early quietly with a handful of soil and steady pressure. Problems handled small rarely grew large. You realize how this approach extended beyond shelter. Food was rationed carefully. Conflict was softened before it sharpened. Energy was conserved rather than spent all at once. Underground life trained restraint. As you sit and think, you understand that these habits did not disappear when people moved back above ground. They shaped how villages formed, how homes were built, how communities weathered hardship. The ground did not teach speed, it taught endurance. You think about how often modern life celebrates visibility and height. Towers, windows, exposure. Underground winters taught the opposite lesson. That strength can be quiet, that safety can be invisible. You pause and press your palm to the soil again, even now. The gesture feels familiar, grounding. It reminds you that stability often lies beneath attention. There is no clear record of who first chose to dig down instead of build up. That choice likely arose many times in many places whenever winter demanded humility. The lesson survived because it worked. You notice how often people still seek enclosed spaces when stressed. Basements, corners, quiet rooms. The instinct remains even if its origin's forgotten. As night approaches, you feel gratitude rather than nostalgia. Underground living was not an ideal. It was a response, a clever, patient answer to a hard question. The lesson buried in the soil is simple. When conditions turn harsh, you do not always need to push forward. Sometimes you need to step back, to lower yourself and wait. That knowledge stays with you, steady and reliable like the ground itself. You return underground one last time, not because winter forces you to, but because the space feels familiar. The entrance is wider now, Light reaches farther inside, the walls hold fewer secrets, still the calm remains. You sit and let the quiet settle around you. This place no longer feels like refuge alone. It feels like a memory made physical. The earth has carried you through fear, cold hunger, and waiting. Now it simply holds you. Underground living was never about hiding forever. It was about knowing when to pause, when to let storms pass without standing in their path. That knowledge does not vanish when shelters collapse or traditions change. It stays in how people respond to hardship. You breathe slowly and notice how your body still relaxes here. Muscles loosen, thoughts drift, the ground has trained you well. As you rest, images surface softly. Firelight against packed soil, breath clouding in shared air. Stories spoken low, hands shaping walls. These moments blur together not as history but as feeling. You realize that the story of underground winter living is not really about the past. It is about adaptability, about choosing cooperation with the environment over confrontation, about listening closely to what the land allows. You lean back and let the shelter do what it always did best, hold. The world above continues to change. It always has. But beneath it, the ground remains steady, offering the same quiet solution. To recurring problem. And with that thought, you begin to drift, no longer thinking about survival, no longer planning, just resting in the knowledge that humans have always found ways to endure. Your breathing slows now naturally without effort. The images soften. The shelter fades into warmth and shadow, no longer to a place you need to imagine clearly. It is enough to feel it. You are safe here, held, supported. Nothing presses you to act or decide. The earth beneath you is patient. It has waited through countless winters and will wait through countless more. Let your thoughts wander gently like smoke thinning near the ceiling. There is no need to follow them. Let them rise and disappear on their own. Outside, the world continues its long rhythms. Seasons turn, snow falls or melts. None of that requires your attention right now. All that matters is this quiet moment, this sense of being supported by something solid and dependable, something that does not rush. If sleep comes, let it arrive naturally. If it does not, that is fine too. Rest is not something to force, it is something to allow. The earth knows this, it always has. Your body grows heavier, your breathing deepens, the last edges of thought dissolve into calm, and as the story settles into silence, you drift comfortably gently, knowing that for tonight and for this moment you are exactly where you need to be. Sweet dreams.